You are listening to an After Dinner Conversation magazine podcast. After Dinner Conversation believes humanity is improved by ethics and morals grounded in philosophical truth, and that truth is discovered through intentional reflection and respectful debate. In order to facilitate this process, we have created a growing series of print books, a monthly short story magazine, and 2 different podcasts. This podcast, Philosophy Ethics Short Story Audiobooks, provides audiobook recordings of stories that have appeared in our magazine. And our companion podcast, Philosophy Ethics Short Story Discussions, is where we discuss the ethics of the choices made in the stories as a way to model the kinds of discussions we hope you're having about these readings with friends, family, or students. We would love it if you went over to check it out. I'm Roberta, your narrator and story editor at After Dinner Conversation Publishing. Thank you for spending your time listening to our podcast and for reading the magazine. Thank you for supporting us through your magazine subscriptions and through patreon.com/afterdinnerconversation. And of course, if you enjoy this audiobook reading, please subscribe to our podcast, share it on social media, and suggest it to friends. Today's story is Cast Out, written by Joanna Michal Hoyt and published in our July 2021 magazine. Cast Out by Joanna Michal Hoyt. Verity pushed back the quilts, rolled off her straw mattress onto the floor, felt for the poker and stirred the ashes. The embers glowed. She wouldn't have to go fire borrowing again. Her chilled hands were clumsy. One glowing bit of wood rolled from the hearth and across the earth floor in the direction of her mattress. She beat at it with the poker until it was completely extinguished. Then she raked the ashes back over the coals, crawled back under the quilts, and breathed out hard, trying to make a warm place with her breath. Slowly her body relaxed toward sleep and stiffened. The mattress was warm again. Was it too warm? That ember had rolled toward it. What if a spark had flown into it when she wasn't looking and was smoldering in the coarse cloth, about to ignite the dry straw inside? She'd wake when the mattress caught fire, and she'd put it out. With what? The water in the pail was frozen. There was a clear foot of snow on the ground. She would throw the snow on the mattress, if she woke in time. But such a fire might smoke heavily. What if the smoke choked her in her sleep, and the fire devoured first her cabin and then the whole settlement? That was hardly likely, she told herself. A woman in her right mind would not think of such a thing. A woman not in her right mind may be more of a danger to her neighbors than she knows, she answered herself. Best to take precautions. She wept as she hauled the mattress out the door, rolled it in snow, hauled it back in, cold and sodden, slung it over her one good wooden chair, set the chair as close to the hearth as she dared, not very close, poked the fire back to life, and wrapped herself in quilts to watch the night out. She woke to gray light filtered through the oiled cloth of the window, to bone-crunching cold and a dead fire. She tried to shrug off her quilt. The pain in her scalp stopped her. Her hair was frozen to the quilt with mucus and tears. Verity held her hands to her belly until they thawed enough to work the scissors and hack her hair off on one side. She pulled her coif on tightly, but still felt ragged edges of hair sticking out. She couldn't go fire borrowing like that. If she was lucky, the neighbors would know her for a dafty, cluck about her to each other, shun her even more markedly than they already did. If she was unlucky, and what else had she ever been? They'd take her for a witch, and then... She smelled smoke again, tried to think of something else. She spent most of an hour struggling with flint and tinder before a spark caught. It was another hour before the fire burned hot enough to do any good. She had meant to make soap, but the day was lost. Again. She had forgotten that 11-year-old Prudence Carlyle was coming to make soap with her. When Prudence knocked at the door, Verity considered pretending she wasn't home. Then she reflected that Prudence could see the smoke of her fire. She opened the door, saw Prudence staring at her face and hair, at the soggy lump of the mattress. "You're ill?" Prudence asked. "Yes," Verity said. "A sane woman might be taken ill. I can't make soap with you today. I hope this isn't catching, but the good Lord only knows. You best run along home. I'll I'll stop in and tell you when I'm better. Which you will never be, a cold voice murmured inside her ears. Verity burst into tears, and when she looked up, the door was closed and Prudence gone. Verity brought a frozen hunk of pork in to thaw for stew, then sat down to spin, trying to steady her breathing to the rhythm of the wheel. It almost worked. At noon, she went out to break the ice from the cow's water trough again. Coming round the back of the byre, she glanced toward the road and saw Goody Carlyle's short, upright figure bustling toward her house. Goody Carlyle hadn't seen her yet. Verity lacked courage to face her exaggerated patience. She ducked behind the byre and into the woods and started walking, staying just inside of the cabins lining the road. She had learned not to wander into the wildwood in her fears. It was too easy to get lost, but far enough off the road and into the trees so no one was likely to call her. When the hail came rattling down through the bare branches, she had already walked a fair piece from her cabin. She ran for the nearest place she had a right to be, the meeting house. The meeting house was the settlement's one stone building. On weekday winter mornings, the children met there to learn from whichever of the settlement's elders had learning and time to spare. On Fridays, Saturdays, and Sundays, the settlement's 2 Jewish families, 12 Catholic families, and 17 Protestant families of one kind and another held their prayer meetings. The different kinds might mutter about each other, but they managed to share the meeting house and to avoid bloodshed. Most of Blackburn's settlers had come upriver, fleeing from blasphemy laws or witch trials or deadly fights between groups of believers. In between lessons and prayer services, the meeting house stood open to whoever had need of prayer or of shelter. To be sure, some people had suggested locking it after the strangers, the first newcomers to enter Blackburn in a generation, began coming upriver with their shadowed eyes and their charred bundles. But since so many of the settlement's folks used the space, and since making dozens of keys would be a nuisance and an expense, it was still open. Verity ducked inside, sat down on a back bench, and tried to steady her loud, gasping breaths. As she did so, she realized someone else was there. Goodman Knowlton, who often led the prayer meetings Verity attended, rose from one of the benches. "Mistress Clark, are you all right?" Knowlton asked. She opened her mouth to say yes. "No," she said. "Are you ailing? Shall I go for Frau Abramowitz?" She looked down at her hands. "I am afraid." "Has someone hurt you? Threatened you? One of the strangers?" His voice sharpened. No, it's only that I'm afraid." "Of what?" She thought of the nightmares that had haunted her for the past year, or perhaps the 5 years since her father's death, or perhaps all her life. She found it increasingly difficult to remember. "Of fearing," she said, "of the harm I may do." He looked startled, then nodded. "Those are wise fears," he said. "But perfect love casteth out fear. Because fear hath torment," she continued the verse. "I know that. I don't know perfect love." "Then you are human," Knowlton said. "Mistress Clark, what harm do you fear you will do?" She tried to tell him. It was hard to find words. Perfect fear casts out language as well as love. At last she gave up on words, looked up at him again. He was rubbing the bridge of his nose between his thumb and forefinger. "Do you truly think these things are likely?" he asked. "No, I know that I am mad to think of them, but how can I trust myself if I am mad? How can I not be afraid?" "There is another promise," he said in the ringing voice he used for reading from Holy Writ at meetings. "Ye shall know the truth, and the truth shall set you free." "I know all the promises," she said. "And you know that lies come from the devil, the father of lies, and you have been listening to him." "I am not a witch," she said, clenching her mind against the fear. She had not seen a witch trial herself, or what followed after, but she had heard the tales. She had dreamed. He had jerked his head back as though she had struck him. "And I am a sinner. May God Almighty forgive me. But I am no witch hunter. I never meant that." "What did you mean?" I don't know, he said with a simplicity that took her off her guard. I was trying to find an answer for you. I don't know. But I think it's true that the devil sends these fears to deceive you. Mistress Clark, that isn't the same as saying that you are a witch, that you are calling up the devil. The devil lies to us all. He looked away at something Verity couldn't see. So I am to tell myself that my fears are lies, and I must not have them? I think that is true, but I can't make myself believe it. I need something more. So I believe. That's a hard truth you've spoken. Not the only one you've told me today. You know the saying, tell truth and shame the devil. I hear you that it is not enough. I know no more, though. I will pray for you. I will think. Her fear was ebbing, replaced by hot embarrassment. I thank you, Master Knowlton, she said. I'd best get home. The sleet's done now, and I have bread yet to start, and... Oh, God have mercy, I ran away from Goody Carlyle and left the fire unbanked. She was up and out the door before he could stop her, running down the road, not caring who saw. Her cabin still stood unburned. Entering, she saw the fire dancing on one end of the hearth and a woman moving her still damp mattress closer to the flames. The woman rose and turned, showing Verity her lined face, bright eyes, and salt-white hair. Frau Abramowitz, you'll forgive my trespassing, I hope, Mistress Clark. I came to check on Goody Carlyle's son's injured hand, and after I told her he was mending well, she said you were sick and not answering your door. Verity combed through her mind for an ailment that Frau Abramowitz might believe in. Then she thought, tell the truth and shame the devil. I am sick, she said, in my mind and soul. And she told Frau Abramowitz what she had told Goodman Knowlton. Frau Abramowitz looked very closely at Verity as she spoke. Yes, you are afraid. You are stiff with it. I meant not to let it show. Some women try that in childbirth. They hide the pain and make it worse. There is no need. What would it look like if you chose not to hide, if you went into the fear? Verity glanced at the closed door, then at Frau Abramowitz. Frau Abramowitz sighed. I've seen women in fear and in pain before, and have you heard me gossip about that? Verity shut her eyes, let the fear rise up to fill her, let it curl her in on herself. Soon she lay in a ball on the floor with her eyes screwed shut, her teeth clenched, her spine curled, her legs drawn in, and her dangerous hands fisted in her midriff where they couldn't hurt anybody. So, Frau Abramowitz said, calm and steady, as though there were nothing strange in what Verity did. That's the fear. Hold it for 3 breaths, then let it go. I can't stop being afraid, Verity muttered through clenched teeth. No, but you can let it back out of your body for now. Frau Abramowitz said, a little piece at a time. Start with your feet. Verity could do that, could uncurl her toes, let her legs straighten, could release the tension in her spine, could let her hands lie open, could finally open her eyes and look up in Frau Abramowitz's face. Well done, Frau Abramowitz said. Am I well now? No. You know one thing to do when you are sick now. There are herbs to help you, too. Lavender, thyme, lemon balm. Steep them in hot water and drink it after you let the fear go. And remember to breathe slow and deep. So the sickness is in my mind, but the cure is in my body? Part of the cure, Frau Abramowitz said. Your fear has words. It speaks to you? Yes, but I try not to listen. Listen. How do you drive out shadows? You bring a light. Hear the words of your fear. Say them. They will sound less true when you hear them clear. When you hear them, when you know them for lies, then say the truth you know instead. Verity did that every day for a week, until she was more than sick of the sound of her own thoughts spoken aloud. At the end of that week, she felt a little better. She stopped speaking the lies and the truths, stopped tensing and relaxing. I am well, she told herself. At least I am well enough. A week after that, the fear had her out in the middle of the night, trudging down the frozen road toward the Quinn cabin to see if she had dropped a coal from her shovel while fire borrowing and kindled their woodshed. She hadn't, of course. But on her way back, she was too busy cursing herself for a crazy fool to watch her footing. She slipped on the black ice, fell, and cried out. Felix Quinn came out, cradling a gun. When he saw Verity gingerly picking herself up, he propped the gun and came to give her an arm. His wife Bridget insisted on putting Verity in a roll of blankets in front of her own fire. When Verity explained clumsily that she was walking because she was afraid of nothing, Mistress Quinn nodded and sat over her in the dark, praying. In the morning, Verity woke to find Mistress Quinn still sitting over her, singing in some Catholic language. It seemed to Verity that the song had run through her dreams and had turned them from nightmare back to quiet. That's a good song, she said. Can you teach me what it means? Kyrie eleison, Christe eleison, Kyrie eleison. Lord have mercy, Christ have mercy, Lord have mercy. Verity sang that to herself the next time the fear pressed on her, which was soon. She tensed and relaxed, spoke the lies and the truths, every day for a month. Finally, when the fear woke her in the night, she stopped thinking, I will kill them all by mistake. She began thinking, I am still sick. I will have to keep talking to myself for another everlasting week. She made one other change that was simpler and harder. She stopped trying to pretend to her neighbors that she was not afraid. Soon she did not have to pretend quite so much. She went back to thank Mistress Quinn for her song, Goodman Knowlton for his prayers, Frau Abramowitz for her wisdom. She stayed to help Frau Abramowitz dig over her garden. While she dug, Frau Abramowitz told her about the uses of the plants she grew. After that, Verity went with Frau Abramowitz to watch, and then to help as she tended animals or people in sickness or in childbed. After a few months, Verity began calling the older woman by her first name, Miriam. The following winter, while Miriam was off tending a feverish child, Verity helped Bridget Quinn bring her first baby into the world. The winter after that, Verity walked the steep deer track up from Blackburn Settlement to the stranger's mountainside hollow, following the wiry girl who had come in search of a midwife. The strangers had trickled in over 3 years. Most spoke courteously to the people of Blackburn Settlement, though they spoke no more than they need to, and did not encourage questions, which indeed the Blackburn folk were none too eager to ask. Some strangers had coins or valuables to exchange for medicine or smith work. Other things, it seemed, they preferred to provide for themselves. Nobody exactly invited them to build at the edge of the settlement, though no one exactly told them to stay away. But they seemed ready enough to stay away, to keep going. Many asked if there were more settlements or only open lands upriver. The first ones were told that there was nothing upriver, only the mountain shoulder, too steep for farming. The later ones were told that there were other newcomers who had found a place up along. Newcomers, the Blackburn people said to them for politeness' sake. But among themselves they always called the new ones the strangers, and were glad they were content to remain so. Until this girl, Martha, with her long face and old eyes, ran into the village green, begging someone to come quick and help her mother, who had been in labor more than 2 days. Verity took her to speak to Miriam. Miriam was sick with the winter chill and had no strength to make the journey. You go with her. You go with the girl, she told Verity. I haven't the skill, Verity protested. Do what you can. Remember, you turned the lambs and brought them out. People are not so different. Only you can't feel for hooves. If I fail, Verity's voice was sharp with fear. This fear Martha understood. No one will blame you. Do you come and they die, she said. If you do not come. Verity went with Martha. She took the little sachet of dry lavender besides the sack of herbs she had brought for the birthing. And when the fear gripped at her on the long cold trail, she sniffed the lavender and was a little comforted. At the stranger settlement, she looked warily at the wary-eyed people who'd come out to watch her, told herself about love casting out fear, and recognized, as she did so, that she saw fear, not menace, in their eyes. When she came into the one-room hut where Martha's mother lay gasping, her fear fell away in concentration. There was room in her mind for nothing but the mother's breathing, the mother's pain, and the shape of the child in the birth sack under her hands. It was noon when Verity entered the stranger settlement. It was growing dark when the child slid free from the mother in a gush of dark blood and other fluids. The cord was wrapped around the child's neck. The child was dead. "My mother, will she live?" was all Martha said. "Yes," Verity said, and by the next morning she was sure it was true. Stranger women came to bury the child, to sit with the mother. Verity shrank from their eyes, but the only ones who spoke to her spoke thanks, except for one old woman who introduced herself as Irene and took Verity aside. "I did what I could," Verity said miserably. "I know this," Irene said. "We will return the favor as we can." But what I could do wasn't good enough." "Like as not, the warning we know will not be enough to keep you safe," Irene said. Then she told Verity what they had fled from, what all of them had fled from. Though they started from different places and at different times, there was a fear sickness that spread from settlement to settlement. It began with a thickening in the air and a foul smell that could not be traced to carrion or to an ill-managed privy. There were bad dreams and shadows in people's eyes, and then one village had found cattle missing and decided they had been stolen by the woods people, by a band that had been at peace with them for years. The group that set off was supposed to take the cattle back by stealth if possible, by force if necessary. The group that came back had no cattle, but they had singed clothing and shamed eyes, and it seemed they had set fire to the woods, people's compound, while its men were away hunting. They couldn't say just why they had done that. Some people stayed and barricaded the village's few stone buildings in preparation for the revenge attack they thought must surely follow. Others fled. So the killers... "They are not with us," Irene assured Verity, but she didn't meet Verity's eyes as she hurried to the next part of her story. In Irene's village, there had been many accusations of witchcraft following an outbreak of sickness. 3 people had been hanged and more had been accused. Some of the accused had managed to escape. Some others had fled in fear of being accused or in fear of the strangeness in their neighbors' eyes. "We ran," Irene said. "We kept running. And now, where else can we run? The slope above us is too steep, and we dare not go back down the river. Isidore and Marie came last month and said the fear plague had reached Gilead settlement. We warn you now of what may come." "Does it follow you?" "I do not think so. Or at least not only us. Sometimes we traveled to a new place and found the fear already there." Verity returned to Blackburn, with the warning gnawing in her mind. She told Miriam, who said gravely, "You know, we all came here running, came to this country, and then came to Blackburn." She also told Goodman Knowlton, who shook his head. "If they have brought a curse with them," he said, "you did well to tell me, Mistress Clark, but don't speak widely of it. There's fear enough in here already." Verity told no one else, as days and weeks went by with nothing worse to contend with than the usual sickness and fears. The warning loosed its hold on her mind. When Martha or other upriver folk came asking for cures or bringing mushrooms or honey or beeswax candles, Verity welcomed them, and soon she forgot to wonder if they brought a curse. Then there came a night when Verity woke with her heart racing and her throat tight with fear. In her dream, as in her waking life, she had come home exhausted from another healing trip to the Stranger's Hollow. But in reality, she had banked the fire and gone to bed, whereas in her dream she had fallen asleep by the fire and waked to find the thatch of the roof blazing above her. She opened her eyes and stared into the dark. No blaze. She looked toward the hearth, saw the faint glow of coals banked under ash. It was only a dream, she told herself. I am supposed to be free of such dreams now, she answered herself. How is it that I am not mad again? I am not mad. I'm awake now, and I know there is nothing wrong. But still she smelled smoke. Smoke and something else foul. Was she sure, after all, that nothing was wrong? And could she be sure she was truly awake, not dreaming comfort while her people burned? She shook her head impatiently, got up, and made her way to the herb garden. Lavender was best for what ailed her, but she had used or given away all of her dry store, and there would be no more for another month yet. Time would help. Part of her mind thought that, while another part pictured the fire spilling from her hearth. That image burned in her mind. She named the lie and the truth aloud. The image didn't fade. Neither did the smoke stench leave her nostrils. The moon slipped out from behind a cloud for a moment. In its cold light, Verity thought for a moment that she saw smoke. But smoke wasn't like this mist. Didn't shape itself like this mist into horrible, impossible faces that dissolved and reformed. She'd never been mad in that way before. Breathing and speaking and herb tea might not be enough for that kind of madness. She needed help. She needed someone else. Go see if there's light in the Quinn's window, she told herself out loud. Even if there isn't, you can knock for them this once. After the baby, they'll be willing enough. Yes, you're ashamed to be fear-sick again. Well, they've seen you sick and shamed before. It will be all right. She started up the road. Someone was already up, walking ahead of her. No, running ahead of her, shouting, "Cowards!" Verity ran after him. "Master Baron, what's this?" He turned to her. Was it the mist that made his face look so pale? "Those devils up the river were mocking at my wife in the privy," he said. "Are you sure?" "She heard them, and I did dream of them. We've ignored the danger too long." His breath steamed, too. No, missed it. Verity's question was cut off by another cry from further up the road. "Seamus! My Seamus!" Mistress Quinn said the baby Verity had helped her birth, now a lad of almost 2 years, was gone. He wasn't in his bed. The cabin door was left open. They called, and he didn't answer. "The strangers must have taken him," Goodman Brown said. "The ones who mocked my wife." "I did dream so," Mistress Quinn said. By the time Verity and her neighbors reached the village green, the mist was thick as sea fog, distorting the faces and the voices of the gathering crowd. Many had heard voices, had warning dreams. Ethan Carr's sheep were gone. Everyone knew Carr was no great hand with fences, but together with the voices and the dreams and the stolen child. Verity felt sick horror filling her. She crouched, let it ball her tight, then let it out, breathing in the smell of mold and smoke, fear and shame, the smell of madness. But it was more than that. The smell was fouler than she had ever known it. The moon tore through the cloud again, showing the strange shapes formed by the sick-hued mist. She breathed hard and ragged with fear, saw the paleness flowing from her open mouth, wheeling up to join the writhing mass of demons in the air, not only from her mouth, but from the mouths and nostrils of her neighbors. "Look!" Verity shrilled. "Look at the mist! Think of what you're saying! Neighbors, it's not the strangers who've hurt us. Look at those shapes, and the smell in the air. There's evil here among us, in us all. We're not the first. Master Knowlton, Miriam, I told you about the fear plagues away downriver." "Yes, there's evil," Goodman Brown called. "Look at the shapes, indeed. There's witchcraft in this. And who's the witch?" "Verity Clark was ever a strange one," a woman's voice answered. Fear choked Verity. She fled blindly back the way she had come. She didn't hear Goodman Knowlton urging that Verity Clark was a good Christian woman who had borne her afflictions patiently and been a help to many. The pain in her chest reminded her to breathe. She focused on her breath, making a little space outside the fear. In that space she understood that she was not the one in danger, even before the voices behind her cried out together, "The strangers!" "Go to them," Verity said aloud to herself. "Warn them." She took the wagon path across the back of the settlement toward the slopes, turned up the deer track, and followed it by feel as much as by sight. After the first steep scramble, she stopped to draw breath. The mist trailed after her, carrying the magnified and distorted echoes of hurrying feet and shouting voices. She was ahead of them, could stay ahead, but not far enough ahead to give the strangers time to disappear. And where could they go on this bitter night? Fear pressed in on her, tight and confining as the young hemlocks that grew denser than a hedge on either side. That was it. The hemlocks grew thick and tight for a good quarter mile, and the path was barely wide enough for two to go abreast. Those who came would be hard put to go around her. This, then, was the place to turn and face them. "Stop!" she shouted, her voice echoing weirdly in the mist. "Stop! Do no harm!" The torches stopped a few yards from her. She couldn't see who held the light. "What have you done with him?" asked a furious voice she didn't recognize. "Tell us now, or it'll be the worse for you." "Hold!" That was Goodman Knowlton. "This isn't one of them. It's Mistress Clark. She knows no more than we. Less, poor creature, if she's afflicted again." "I am not mad now," she said. "I was mad, and you helped me, Master Knowlton. You told me I'd be listening to the devil's lies. You said the devil lies to us all, and he is lying to you now." "The child is truly gone." "Did anyone stay back near his house to search for him, or to welcome him if he wanders back?" "What use?" That was Goldman Barone, not Knowlton. "When we know those devils have him." "How do you know that?" There was a brief silence. Verity answered her own question. "You know that the same way I used to think I knew that if I didn't douse my fire with snow every night, it would burn the settlement down. I knew because my fear told me. No other reason." She sighed. "Reason enough, I thought it then, but you taught me better, Master Knowlton. Teach them better. What did they come to do tonight? To demand the boy? To threaten? To kill? You know Holy Writ. You know it was an evil spirit of madness that made Saul try to kill David." "But Saul knew David, knew him for a friend," Knowlton argued. "And what do we know of the strangers? They came running from a curse. They came bringing a curse." True, Verity thought. That's true, isn't it? They told me. Why can't I remember? She looked aside, wondering if her mind would clear once she wasn't looking into Knowlton's pale, strained face. The face that looked back at her from the hemlocks was paler and more terrible. Her father's face as it was just before he died, pain-twisted, blood at the corners of his mouth. "He is dead," she told herself. "Not here, not here." No. The face was Goody Barrowan's, contemptuously staring at the crazy woman. But Verity had never noticed before that Goody Barrowan had such long, sharp teeth. She doesn't, Verity thought desperately. Not real. It's the mist. The mist is coming up with them. They're bringing the curse. They say the strangers are devils. They said I was mad or witched, but it's them. It's them. It's their evil they would put on us. All the times they turned away from me, talked about me as though I couldn't hear. But Goodman Knowlton looked at me, talked to me as a friend, and so did Mistress Quinn, and Miriam. Miriam told me. She told me. "Bring a light," Miriam's voice murmured in her mind. "Bring a light." Miriam was surely out of reach. It wasn't likely she had been able to make the steep climb as fast as her able-bodied neighbors. Verity herself would have to deal, using what Miriam had taught her. She remembered then what else Miriam had said. "You think they are cursed," Verity said, looking back at Goodman Knowlton, "because they came running. I was born in Blackburn, but my father and mother came there running from the fighting between the French and the British. Master Knowlton, I've heard you tell how you came running from those who would have hanged you for a blasphemer. Mistress Quinn, you told me once what they did to your mother's people, so that she fled. All our people came running. The curse is in all of us. If it's in them, it was in me. I know that much." "The curse is in all of us," Master Knowlton agreed slowly. "Holy Writ says so. Let me think." "Get her out of the way!" That was a woman's voice, thin and desperate. Mistress Quinn's. "Why are we listening to a mad woman while my Seamus is in danger?" I want to help your Seamus, Verity insisted. I think he's lost in the mist in Blackburn. The strangers haven't taken him. There were no voices ahead of me on the trail, no lights. I want us to go back and find him. How could I not wish him well? I helped him into the world. You remember that. And you remember what I owed you from before. You said it right. I was cursed. I was mad. And you helped me. I want to help you now. Verity launched into the song Mistress Quinn had sung to her. Her voice was weak and ragged. The mist clung in her throat. She was losing the note. She was losing her courage. Mistress Quinn's voice joined hers. First it was thin and quavering. Then it rolled rich and deep, and other voices joined it. A wind that smelled of lavender flowed down the path. The mists rolled back from Verity, and she breathed the clean air gratefully. Someone was shouting away back down the trail. Verity sighed. She didn't know if she had the strength to talk them down again. Then the wind stilled. The singing faded, and she heard the voice. Miriam's voice. I found the boy! I found the boy! Verity ran down the path after the others, thinking she'd have to wait until they were all back in Blackburn to understand what had happened. But as she came out of the dense hemlocks, she saw that, while others went down the road toward the settlement, Miriam had waited for her, and so had Bridget Quinn. My Felix has Seamus. He'll be all right, Bridget Quinn said. Frau Abramowitz found him out behind our cabin. Mistress, Verity, I'm sorry for what I called you. But you weren't wrong, Verity said. Bridget half smiled and ran down the track. Miriam took Verity's hand, and they walked home together in the growing light. And now the discussion questions. Number 1. At the start of the story, Verity tells Master Knowlton in the community center that she is afraid to fear. What does she mean by this? What is causing her fear? Number 2. What does it mean to tell truth and shame the devil? Does that really work in life? And number 3. Verity said she stopped trying to pretend to her neighbors that she was not afraid. How much do you pretend not to be afraid in life? Why do you pretend at all? Is there value in telling others your fears? Number 4. Why is Verity the only person in the story who can save the community from the fear plague? And number 5. How does Verity fight the fear plague mist in the story? What causes the fear plague mist in real life? Do you know? How do you fight it in real life? What do you think? We've been reading Cast Out, written by Joanna Michal Hoyt, and the discussion continues next week with the story The Book of Approved Words by W.M. Pyenton. If you enjoyed this story, head over to our companion podcast, After Dinner Conversation Discussions, and listen to our discussions of this and other short stories from our magazine. We want to hear what you think. Let's continue the discussion on our webpage, in the comment section, or on our Facebook page. Links are in the description. Thank you for joining us, and until next time, stay safe and let's keep the discussion alive.